I'll stand again.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for all the questions. There's far too much for me to respond to, so I'll take the main things. What Pete was just saying is, I think, absolutely right. One way of thinking about Greece, and it's right, it's actually Southern Europe rather than Greece. But the kind of global capitalist crisis, crises find a way of kind of as usually a focus points where the crisis is condensed and sort of concentrated economically and then politically. And that place is the Eurozone, but it's particularly Greece, it's the southern peripheral states of the Eurozone. So what happens in Greece, what happens in Spain, what happens in Portugal, is absolutely, in a way, it's kind of an exaggerated form of what's happening across the world. And politically, what happens in Greece, given that is the country in which the left seems to be a government in waiting, can have sort of massive repercussions. There can be a ripple effect politically. So just as Greece kind of concentrates the economic crisis, it can also concentrate a political crisis. And what happens in Greece politically can kind of spread out across the rest of the world. And I think that people can be, just the rise of Syriza itself, the way it's kind of fired the international left in Europe at least, it's a tiny condition of what it might do if it actually took power. In terms of it actually taking power, in terms of whether or not it's moved to the right, I kind of agree with Simon that I think it has moved to the right, but I also agree with Alan that I think that when and if it gets to power, and it could be, and the Greek government could collapse at any week, any day, it'll be faced very quickly with collapsing, with capitulating, in which case it just loses its support. The pressure on Syriza from its support to sort of follow through on what it says is really intense. And of course it will also come under intense pressure from capital not to do it. And there's something that Stathis Kouvalakis said in a letter, actually, in response to Alex Kalinikos' article on Greece. And he's now a central committee member of Syriza. And he says that Syriza will be faced with a government will be faced with a stark choice: either surrender and renege on its commitments, or press ahead. And then he says, look, what's the dynamic that will come into effect if it presses ahead, if it fulfills it, if it moves forward on its promises to reject the memorandum agreements with the Troika and so on. He says that this will mean engaging in a protracted battle which will almost certainly lead to results that go beyond the current objectives put forward by the leadership of Syriza. It's kind of this is a transitional dynamic. These are why rejecting the austerity measures of the Troika and so on leads them either to collapse and being kicked out, and that would be a disaster for them, disaster for the left internationally, I think, as well, or to press on and then take the consequences of that, which will mean radicalising. I'm going to open the door when I'm speaking. I can multitask. Sorry. Right. Now, my feeling is that I hesitate to say this. Of those two outcomes, I fear that the first outcome is more likely, actually, that Syriza does capitulate. I think that's actually a more likely outcome. I think that when you look at one of the arguments against left reformism and centrism that you often hear is that, well, look at the history of left governments in power. It's a history of collapse or military overthrow in the case of Chile. It shows that it doesn't work. It doesn't show that it doesn't work. It shows that the forces ranged against the left are huge. The challenges facing the left are huge. Of course, most attempts to get beyond capitalism will fail. Of course they will. It's not an easy thing. How do you overthrow capitalism? How do you build a democratic, humane, socialist system? It's not something you can just do like that. You are likely to fail most times. But we have to, if we are socialists, we have to kind of have the hope that we will succeed, that we have to kind of try to drive things forward to the extent that we can. We have to hope and put pressure on the Syriza government, hope that it does the right thing. But I think we also need to be pessimistic. We need to be prepared for the likelihood that it won't do that. How long have I got?
A couple of minutes.
Okay. If I just respond to a couple more things, I totally agree with the difference. I think Phil said at the start between the difference between government and power, and taking government power, in fact, to go into government isn't necessarily to take government power. It's not to take state power. It's certainly not to take kind of social power. And I agree that in Venezuela, you know, the class that is in charge is the bourgeoisie. Of course it is. You know, and this is perhaps that was John's point, but this is true. In terms of, okay, so Simon's point about, well, what would a left government in the UK look like, kind of dovetailing with Dave's point about the kind of concrete demands made in Trotsky's transitional programme. Again, I think Peter's absolutely right with that. I mean, I don't know. What would it look like? But I think that the importance of the left government perspective is not to fill out, you know, in well in advance. You know, we're shall I be optimistic and say we're about 10 years away from a left government? It's not to come up with a programme of what we're going to do. You know, we can come up with a programme if left unity was to stand in elections. Of course, we'd have to come up with a manifesto of what it would do. But it's not really, you know, it's not going to be in a position to do those things. But you can't really fill out the programme until you get to the point when you actually know what the programme is. What are the actual demands of working people? You know, how do we respond to those things? One thing that's been raised, of course, is the example of Chile, the chilling example of Chile. What happens when the government really challenges power, challenges capital? You get this revolt of the deep state and so on. Of course, you know, this is something that we can't avoid. But it seems to me that saying now that what we want a transitional government to do, and having perhaps in a left unity manifesto saying arm the workers, would seem to me to be a bizarrely, you know, counterproductive. You know, for most people, for me, the idea of arming people right now seems to me to be absolutely absurd. There may well be, and quite frightening actually. Who's going to get these arms? Anyone who knocks on the door, say, "Here you go, here's a Kalashnikov. Go and do go defend the local workers' council." In a situation in which it becomes necessary to arm people, and there may of course be those. Of course, there's likely to be that situation in a revolutionary situation. That's when you start talking about it. But I think that talking about it right now is just. I don't think it's at all relevant. Okay, thank you. So I'll stop there. Thank you.